Hello, hello, hello. This is Pierce Arancel here from Approve Mobile Security. Very excited to be part of the Now Secure Connect event today. Today, I'll be discussing the Digital Markets Act, specifically how it will be affecting app developers and security practitioners. For those who don't know, the DMA is a piece of legislation that's been rolled out in the European Union. We'll also look at what the global trend of that is. But the biggest concern is the growing need to address security in context of side-loaded apps. So pressing along here, what is the DMA? Well, basically, in context of what we care about here at Now Secure Connect, it's a piece of legislation that's forcing two major gatekeepers, namely Apple and Google, to allow for side-loaded apps on their platforms via third-party app stores. We'll discuss a little bit about how Apple and Google's current attestation solutions work, but this new avenue towards side-loaded apps is going to reduce their effectiveness, and we'll talk about why. At some point, it's going to be very important for security practitioners to find alternative solutions to fill in the gaps, specifically preventing things like illegal app copies from accessing APIs that they shouldn't be, and preventing manipulation of apps in runtime. While this sounds new, maybe to some of you, many AppSec pros and app developers have already been implementing some of these strategies at the app level, usually more so in highly regulated industries. But I can foresee more and more industries that maybe aren't as highly regulated needing to defend themselves at the app level now that there's a chance that their apps will be available outside of the Apple and Google ecosystem. So hopefully Apple and Google will lower their revenue tax that they take from everyone who uses their platform so that developers can invest in effective security, either by partnering with vendors or by hiring security practitioners in-house. So let's focus a little bit on part one of my presentation, the EU Digital Markets Act and its impact on app security. At the core, the DMA is intended to increase innovation through competition, basically by preventing large companies from abusing their market power. These regulators are coming in trust busting, basically preventing monopolistic activities. This particular legislation designates 6 gatekeepers and 22 core platforms, but in context of mobile, I think we're going to be focusing more on Google and Apple. Explicitly in this legislation, it requires Apple, the App Store, and Google, the Google Play Store, to enable alternative app stores or side-loaded apps. So basically, you can go to other places than where you normally go to download apps. On top of that, there's also going to be the push for allowing alternative payment mechanisms. I did want to highlight that this is part of a larger trend. That the UK is coming out with their own similar legislation. The DOJ in the US is doing some trust busting activities. I think that the core here, what I'm getting at is it's a good idea to start thinking about how an enterprise app developers, app security practitioners can defend themselves to forces that are bigger or beyond their control. So the DMA is part of a larger worldwide trend that we will be seeing, and there's a big impact on security. This does present a big opportunity for innovation. However, there has been a resistance to adapt this from Google and Apple in the name of security and privacy. I would argue that this is a farce. Mobile app security from Apple and Google, they're intimately interwoven with their app stores and Google Play ecosystems. Apple claims the new options will open up new avenues for malware, fraud, and scams. I would argue that these avenues have been there already. The way that it works currently is Apple's ecosystem is very secure for anyone who wants to play by Apple's rules. So maybe the average consumer can feel safe by downloading their apps off the Apple Store, but anyone who really has been trying to unlock their full potential of their iPhone has probably already jailbroken it, rendering many of these protections useless. Also, obviously, an attacker is not going to play by the rules. They're going to escalate privileges any way they can. So Apple's stance on preserving security and privacy really only stands for people using their platform the way that they intended. I think this is a terrible security strategy because attackers are going to be constantly prodding and trying to find the path of least resistance. So finding the points of weakness that Apple doesn't cover. Moving on, here's a quick video by Kyle Andier of Apple. Let's just hear what he has to say.
I will say, the proof is kind of in some of the studies we've seen. I mean, there's a suggestion that somehow our platform doesn't appear on the top most secure platforms. I guess I haven't seen those studies. Every study I've seen has said iPhone is the most secure, is the most safe mobile device or computing device in the marketplace. That's consistent over and over and over again. We have not had to offer third-party or first-party security services or applications on iPhone because it's built in. It is intended to be as secure as possible. Now we're entering a world where there's going to be less security. So ironically enough, users may have to pay for additional security from third parties. We'll see what happens. But to date, that hasn't had to happen because we've delivered on that promise year after year after year.
But in this video, Kyle Andier of Apple boldly claims we've not had to offer third-party or first-party security services or applications on iPhone because it's built in. This is so damaging because while this assertion is to reassure iPhone users, it clearly blurs the lines between the device user and the app developer and completely masks the complex reality of app security. Apple and Google pretty much assume everyone's following their rules when they say their app stores and platforms are secure. If everyone followed the rules, I mean, most of us in this room as security practitioners wouldn't have jobs. And more importantly, progress, findings, improvements, all of this would slow to a standstill. It requires a certain level of testing and breaking to find progress here in the app security space. Living within the walls set by Google and Apple, we're pretty much dooming ourselves to participate in a slow march towards mediocrity or worse. I'd say it's a better idea to move fast, break things, learn from those mistakes, become more secure over time. So how is this all going to evolve? Well, we're sort of dealing with the forces of nature here, forces beyond our control. As institutions get larger, they're incentivized to continue growing, not because they're evil or anything like that, but as they get larger, they just inherently start becoming more monopolistic. And this kind of hinders progress and innovation. This is when regulators will step in. This cycle kind of repeats. At the end of the day, the monopolies will be busted by regulators, and we're going to have to figure out how to secure our apps despite all that's going on around us. So how is this going to play out? Well, large players, basically apps are going to be available on things outside of the traditional ecosystem that we're accustomed to. Large players, I'm thinking like maybe Spotify, Epic Games, these companies have already invested heavily in their brand. They've invested in app security. They're going to distribute their apps independently. They don't want to pay Apple and Google their tax. That this trend is going to happen whether Apple and Google likes it. However, that does put more of the onus on app developers to ensure their apps are secure at the app level. I would also argue that with less control over apps, there's going to be a shift towards more API security. Maybe we're going to see an increase in adoption of API first design. Basically, mobile app providers are going to have to assume they're no longer going to have access to app store securities and systems, and they're going to have to invest in security at the app layer. So what I would recommend is starting this conversation early with your security team, talk to pen testers you're working with, talk to vendors, talk to partners, figure out what they're doing to mitigate the risk associated with deploying their apps on third-party app stores and making them available as side-loaded apps. All right, well, the good news is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of good organizations have already put in the work to tell us what we need to do to secure our app when we deploy them in untrusted environments. So getting back to the fundamentals is a good first step. Some of the key issues. Well, apps, they're going to still live in untrusted environments. Mobile device is inherently untrusted. Anyone who has your app on their device can do whatever they want with it. But I think the change is really in the perception here, because the distribution channel, if it's not coming from Apple or Google, will also be untrusted. So this is bringing a new light to the whole deploying software in untrusted environments conversation. Apps should really be designed knowing they're going to be attacked. I would argue that security in depth and adaptability are some of your strongest allies in this conversation. These are things I'd be asking from my architects, partners, vendors is how do they prevent specific threats? How do they have multiple fail points? How do they plan to adapt if the environment changes or if there's a new threat that they hadn't detected before? I would also argue it's important to pen test early, often, always if you can. Continuous pen testing is great. I also think it's important to couple this data with data you're collecting in the field. So if you don't already have a mechanism in place to either prevent runtime attacks or track runtime threats as they are appearing on your app, I would take a look at implementing something like that, and then using this data in sort of a continuous fashion to constantly improve your security posture. Okay, so I had mentioned that some organizations have already put in a lot of the hard work needed that in frameworks that we can just follow to help bolster our app security. The first place I'd go is OWASP Mobile Top 10. This provides description and mitigation information for 10 of the worst mobile application security vulnerabilities. A new one just came out this year. I think the last published one was in 2016, but I know it's an ongoing project. So if you're already a member of OWASP, you can get access to this. The other one I would point to is the mobile app or OWASP Mobile Application Security Verification Standard. This one is intended to set the standard for mobile app security. Basically, provides a set of valuable tools for mobile app developers. If you don't have the time to monitor OWASP or any of these frameworks, that's something that we at Approve are always doing. So if you want the Spark Notes, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn or follow our page on LinkedIn where we're constantly updating what we're finding here. In fact, we just came out with a white paper on MOSVS 2.0. I didn't want to skip over NIST here. The cybersecurity framework, this is an excellent piece of guidance for industry, government agencies, and other organizations to manage cybersecurity risks. Basically, it's a good tool for kind of going through the life cycle of planning and then recovery should something go wrong. So I would point your team to some of these frameworks to make sure you're following along on these guidelines and defending yourself from the dynamic nature of changing where your app will be deployed. With layered security or defensive depth in mind, I sort of think of app security when an app is out in the wild in two forms. One would be sort of like static prevention. I call that like app hardening. So building a wall around your app. I don't think anyone's been called a fool for putting a wall around something they want to protect. So usually this is like in the form of obfuscation. So making it more difficult for someone to just kind of understand how your app is running is a good first step. That being said, it is a static protection. So having a wall might be good, but it'd be good to kind of monitor that wall as well. So I wouldn't put all my eggs in this basket. I also probably wouldn't overinvest in something static. Just, saying that I got it right here with just this wall, I don't think that covers everything. It would be good to couple that with something like runtime protection, where you can monitor things like credential stuffing, tampering, seeing if someone's using Frida, seeing if someone's running your app on a rooted or jailbroken device, seeing if there's Magisk. Crucially, on top of this, I think the ability to update things over the air is important. This will add flexibility for 0-day attacks as they come out, or for when things inevitably go wrong, because they will go wrong. We're in security for a reason. If things didn't go wrong, none of us would have jobs here. So don't put yourself in a situation where you're a victim of circumstance. Adaptability is key. I think I was already describing this graphic. I really like it. It's an old one, so many of you have probably seen this already. But I did want to kind of highlight the planning part and the monitoring part, because as you plan for this new legislation, you should still go through your normal secure coding practices, still get your code reviewed, pen tested, all that. But you do want to make sure you're releasing something that is now comfortable being deployed in a third-party app store. So obfuscation is important, yes, but really runtime security and making sure that only true and attested versions of your apps are the things that are connecting to your backend. That's where this sort of runtime security protection stuff comes in play. And this will be crucial because in third-party app stores, one of the biggest risks is really someone repackaging your app, looking like you, trying to connect to your services. So this is going to be more and more important. And that RAS solution should be able to feed telemetry back into however you're collecting it, and that comes back to your planning stage. So, you should be continuously improving throughout this process. And what's key is as you see what's out in the wild, you'll be able to make more informed decisions on where you need to invest in the future. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about overall limitations of Apple and Google security. Even today, in a perfect world, if we could depend on Apple and Google, and if there weren't other platforms, there would still be limitations to what Apple and Google are providing. So basically what they're currently trying to do is they have a formal review process, a combination of manual and automated reviews, primarily to root out malware to protect the reputation of their app stores. It's also looking for things like violations of their user agreement and user privacy regulation. All of this is important, but it doesn't really protect an enterprise from this is more for the consumer. It's less so for the app developer. So, keep in mind some of the limitations around runtime protections, and then the whole proliferation of side-loaded apps means much of this approval process is no longer going to work. So let's talk a little bit about the specifics here. So flashback to 2021, Google had announced its Play Integrity API, which consolidated multiple integrity offerings, including safety net attestation, under one single API. At the same time, they announced the deprecation of safety net attestation. You can now call the Google Play API to check that you're really interfacing with your genuine app binary, so far installed by Google Play, running on a genuine Android device. If something is off, for example, like a side-loaded or tampered app, or it's on an unofficial emulator or rooted, you can decide what defense to take. The solution doesn't take defensive actions for you. What the API does do, it provides an integrity verdict. So in response to something like, it would say something like genuine app binary, genuine Play install, genuine Android device, but it doesn't really work on rooted phones. It doesn't work on AOSP builds. It's really only works in an environment that's defined as problematic by Google, not so much the app developer. So the only kind of feedback you'll really be getting back is like, is this integrity level virtual, basic, strong? It's not so granular. It's not so actionable to developers. So something else to consider. I don't know if you all have had experience with this, but there's been requests to lower latency. So there's been latency issues. And then there's just been kind of a whole slew of issues here with regards to like quotas. So Google currently offers a quota of 10,000 API integrity checks per day. If this is exceeded, then that service will no longer work for your app. You can extend that quota, but it's on a case-by-case basis, and it takes some time. So obviously, denial of service attacks could be prevalent if using this. I think that kind of covers Google for now, but I did want to highlight there's really no man-in-the-middle protection using these services. It's slow and complex to implement, and there's not many secret dynamic secret management. It can be easily fooled. Fast forward to Device Check by Apple. This was first introduced on iOS 11. Primary use case for this was Device Check when it was launched. to provide developers a way to distinguish between customers who had already received like premium content in an app. So basically, has someone already gone through a free trial or not? But they did add some new features to this, although I would say they're highly limited. Again, this is iOS only, limited device checks. We don't know what the service rate limits are. And again, just no real man in the middle protection, no real dynamic secrets management. Really, again, this is to protect the consumer more than to help the developer, I would say. The other thing that we didn't really cover here is the increasing cost of app development and the need to find solutions that work across multiple platforms. We haven't really spoken about anything in the Harmony OS space, but I have seen more and more use cases from enterprises that are globally distributed and trying to reach new markets that have a requirement for Harmony OS, despite not really needing to support them currently. What they're trying to do is future-proof their architecture so that they can adapt to changing a future state. The other thing is, even currently working across Google and Apple, it's difficult to architect once and deploy everywhere. I think more and more teams are trying to find ways to do that and use cross-platform development tools. So why do I bring this up? Well, I think it's important to future-proof your app in terms of, security for upcoming regulations and potential changes in where your app's going to be deployed, but also to take into account future platforms that your app might have to be deployed on. It comes back to the whole make sure your solution is adaptable to changing environments discussion. I would also argue that app developers who are investing heavily in app security probably shouldn't have to pay as much to Apple and Google. They're getting less value from them and relying less on their security. So why should they have to pay as much? I don't know if I'm the minority in this thought, but I do strongly feel that way. So let's go through the conclusion side here. Side loading does have risks, but the benefits to app developers can be huge. And I think when the risks are mitigated properly, the benefits are going to hugely outweigh those risks. With the benefits, obviously, do come responsibility, and developers are going to have to pick up the work to cover things like app hardening, to API security, to attestation. The good news is there's a vibrant ecosystem of vendors, partners, open source tools. There's already people in this space. So if you're new to this, reach out to any of the people that are participating here. I'm sure they'd love to talk to you, let them know what they've learned and what they're working on. I do think defense in depth will involve multiple vendors. So finding one silver bullet probably isn't going to work out here. That being said, even I did want to point out that even for app owners that do not plan to support side loading, those app developers, those companies, they're still going to be exposed because they do have valuable data in the cloud, and they have to anticipate a proliferation of fake apps being deployed on these new third-party app stores, trying to connect through their APIs to that cloud. So just saying, look, I'm not going to participate in this isn't good enough. I guess the genie is out of the bottle, if you will. So at least, protecting your APIs and protecting your reputation is probably a good idea. So any questions, please reach out to me. My name is Pierce Arancel. I work at Approved Mobile Security. My email is pierce.arancel@approved.io. I'm happy to answer any questions, and very looking forward to continue the conversation with each and every one of you. Thank you.